Hi, I'm Casey Bell, and you're watching Writer to Writer Interviews. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Writer to Writer Interviews. I'm your host, Casey Bell, and Stacy Juba is the writer who will be joining me today on Writer to Writer Interviews. Let's get started. When did you first begin writing or noticing that writing was definitely something you were good at?
I've been writing since I was a kid. I wrote my first story in third grade. And then in fifth grade, I was writing quite a bit. I was entering a lot of contests, like book review contests. And I won some. I had a teacher that was really encouraged me to write because I was very introverted. So I think writing was just a way for me to express myself. And by the time I was in high school, I was submitting stories to magazines. And I got my first book published when I was 18 from a contest that I entered in high school. It was a contest for teen writers. And then the winner got published with Avon Books. And then I've just been writing like ever since. I've been a newspaper reporter. I've written several novels that the later years weren't as easy as the beginning. I got a lucky break in the beginning, but then there were several years of rejection in between the publication of my first book and my second book. But just been pretty much writing ever since then.
That's amazing. Being published at 18. I don't know I can't say that. But technically I'll say I don't know the experience of being accepted. Just about everything I've submitted has been rejected. I think one time, I don't even remember the name of it and if it still exists, but there was a website, I think they said yes to everyone. You submit a poem and then they would send you the book. It was like a book of everyone's stuff. And then they will offer some type of, now if you pay for this, we'll get, so it was basically, I don't want to say a scam because it wasn't, like you really did get your stuff published.
Right.
But the purpose of it was them to make more money because they would ask for money after that. It was free. Everything was free, but then they would ask for money to do other stuff. And I would be like, no, I'm good. I'll just take this one opportunity. But I always often wonder what it would be like to someone to finally say, yes, we like your stuff. So I think that's amazing that you started so young and that you were able to, because I started young, but I didn't know that's who I was, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think that's amazing. So what was that first book? Do you remember what it was?
Yeah, it was a young adult hockey novel called Face Off. At the time, I was really interested in ice hockey. It was like I had gotten really into hockey during the '88 Olympics, and then right after that was like the Stanley Cup playoffs, and my team was the Boston Bruins, and so I started following the Bruins, and they did really well that year. And I love to read, so I wanted to read a book about ice hockey, and I couldn't really find much fiction. It was mostly biographies of players, and even that was a lot of players like from the 1970s and before, retired players before I got interested in it. So I decided to write my own. So it's partly to entertain myself, but partly around that same time, I happened to see an ad in a teen magazine that was advertising like this competition for teenage writers. And they actually did a little profile of the last winner. And it was a contest that was held every other year. So I decided to just write this book, and I just had it in sort of the back of my mind that if I finished it, I was going to enter it in the next time they offered the contest. So around the time I knew that the contest would be coming up, I would go to the bookstore and I bought, I would look in the back of the book, so the Avon books in the young adult section, looking for an entry form because the magazine had said you could get entry forms, in the next time it would be held in the back of their books. So I remember going to the bookstore and I'd been checking it for months. Every time I was in a bookstore, I'd look in the back of the Avon Flair books for the entry form, and then finally they had it, and I saw one. So then I finished up writing the book and entered it in the contest, and then I found out I had won, like my freshman year in college, and the book did really well. Like even the Hockey Hall of Fame in Canada actually put it on its recommended reading list for kids that would go visit on field trips. And I got a lot of fan letters. Eventually it did go out of print, but I brought it back into print around 2012. So I brought it back. I updated it a little bit in the sense of I took out some of the references to like bands from the from early 1990s, like I had like Def Leppard and and I had names of some hockey players that have since retired, so I just kind of took out that stuff, and then I brought it back as a paperback and then as an ebook, like for Kindle and Nook and everything, and then eventually it is an Audible audiobook, and then I wrote the sequel. I had a sequel in my drawer that had gotten rejected because there was a lot of turnover at the publishing house at that time, and I wasn't able to get it published anywhere else. And it had always been I knew it needed a lot of work because 20 years later, and it needed some updating and everything. And I was a better writer now than I was then. So, but it had always been on my kind of bucket list that I wanted to kind of revamp the sequel and publish it. And I had been getting there was like 1 week where I received like 2 letters or 2 emails from grandmothers who had told me how much that their grandkids had enjoyed reading Face Off, and was there ever going to be a sequel to it. So I just so happened to receive those around the same time. So that I think that's what kind of triggered it, that it was either going to be now or never. I actually had people that were waiting for it and that wanted it. So I dug it out of my drawer and I totally rewrote it. And then I reissued published the sequel, Offsides, probably about 2 years, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. So that was interesting because it was a kind of a collaboration between my teenage self and my adult self, because I was using that manuscript and then totally rewrote every word, but the spirit of it remained the same. So
that's cool. So I'm intrigued by your book, 25 Years Ago Today. What is that about? And what was the inspiration of you writing it?
That's a mystery novel, like a women's sleuth novel. And it's about a obit writer named Chris Langley, and she's an aspiring reporter, and she works for a daily newspaper. And one of her jobs that she does is she goes on the microfilm and compiles 25 and 50 years ago today column. And while she's on it, one day she comes across a 25-year-old murder, an unsolved murder, and she becomes kind of obsessed with it and driven to solve it. So she starts getting involved with the family, and then she falls for the victim's nephew, and just immerses herself in this mystery to kind of redeem herself from, she's always felt guilty about an incident in her past, which is something like a tragedy, like with her cousin, that she felt responsible for. And so she kind of latches on into this case as a way to like redeem herself. Like, she doesn't want this family to keep suffering. She wants to find out what happened to the victim, Diana Ferguson. And it was inspired because I once had that job that Chris had. I started like after college. My first job after college was as a obit writer and editorial assistant for a small daily newspaper. This is actually where I met my husband, because he was a sports writer, and I eventually became a reporter there. But kind of before I was a reporter, I was doing the obits and the weddings and the 25 and 50 years ago today columns. So I just kind of got the idea. Like, I was always coming across kind of boring stuff. And I had to, the editor was always like, you have to find something uplifting, because nobody wants to remember something bad that happened 25 or 50 years ago today. You had to find something like upbeat, and sometimes it was hard to find something that was like upbeat, but that was also newsworthy, So it was a challenge, and I'd get a headache, just kind of combing over the microfilm. And I just got the idea, like, what if there was a character who came across a murder and, on the microfilm, and just became obsessed with it. And I just kind of couldn't let go of that idea. So that's how it came about.
Now, it seems like you have a wide variety of publishing experience. You didn't just do it one way. So what were the different things you did? Because your first book was published basically by someone else and they did all the work. So you didn't really learn anything. So when you started publishing books on the regular, how did you begin to learn how to do it? And what did you do to start publishing?
I think for the first book, I did learn something about editing, definitely, because I received a long, intimidating editorial letter with all the things I had to revise and rewrite in Face Off. So they didn't just publish it like the way it was. They had a lot of suggestions on how to improve it, and we had to go through a couple of rounds of editing, and then after that we went through copy editing, and then they had a publicist call me and talk about book promotion. So I did learn a lot with that, but if that was back before there was really the option of indie publishing, because at the time it's like 1991, 92. With self-publishing, if you wanted to go that route, you'd have to spend like hundreds of thousands of dollars to get to get a whole bunch of books printed, and then you'd have to kind of sell them. So that was a very expensive endeavor. So over the years, I could work with agents, and if I got rejected from a publishing company or an agent, a lot of times they would give me feedback. So I just kind of taught myself, how to get better and better at the editing and how to find my voice more. And then 25 years ago today, I got that accepted by a small independent mystery publisher. So I work with them on that book, and then my book Sink or Swim, they accepted also. So I learned, I think, a lot more about the business side of writing from working with them. And that's when I launched my website, and just kind of really got involved with different author communities. And at the time, that was when Kindle, and ebooks were just really starting to take off. And so I just kind of learned, I just kept up with all of that and learned all of that. And at the time the publisher only had the paperback rights. They didn't have the ebook rights, because ebooks were really literally just starting to come about around that time. So as I was doing research and everything, I realized I should probably put out a Kindle edition. So I just kind of taught myself how to do it. I went on Smashwords, and they had a really extensive instructions on how to do it, how to design it, and how to how to set it up. The publishing company let me use the cover. They were nice enough to let me use the cover for the ebook version. And then at the time, there was a lot less competition with ebooks. There were less books out there, so it did really well. I had like a couple of BookBub ads. So 25 years ago today, got to like number 30, I think, on the Kindle paid list, and then to number 5 in the Nook store. And Sink or Swim did really well also. And then there came a point where the publisher for my next book, they were going to publish my next book, Dark Before Dawn, but by that time they were realizing that they wanted to acquire the ebook rights for the book. So we decided to part ways, because by publishing myself, I could get a 70% royalty from Amazon, and I didn't really see any point in sharing that and getting a lot less, because I was finding with the small press there wasn't that much more that they could do for me in the terms of promotion that I couldn't do myself. And I wanted to. It's different, like with a big traditional publisher where they're paying you a large advance and they're sending it out to a lot of review places, and they have sales reps that can go into bookstores and that kind of thing. If the small publisher doesn't have all those resources, so it just didn't make sense for me to share my ebook rights with them, because I wanted to have the control over it, to set the price and to be able to have a sale and try to run a BookBub ad and that kind of thing. So I think I just kind of taught myself the whole entrepreneurial side of publishing, and it's just been a learning experience ever since. And then eventually I became a freelance editor, because I think just working, been working with editors, and since I was like 18, I just learned it I'm going to say, like, no, you don't just write a perfect draft. All of my drafts I've had to work with editors on, and I think I've learned and got better and better at it. So then I wanted to be able to pass that on to other writers, like what I've learned. So that's how I got into editing. So it's just it's a journey, that's been a learning experience from the beginning.
So follow-up question, when they gave you those editing suggestions, when they gave it to you, were you okay with them? And as you look back today, would you say it was a constructive criticism, or would you say I would have preferred them to leave it as it was?
I think the majority of it I was okay with, and I could, I can see why they made those changes. I'm trying to think what some of the changes were. It was like small, but I don't think it was anything major. It was just kind of smaller things by this, by the scene, or awkward parts, or I think they wanted less description. And now, as an editor now, I could probably understand why. At the time I didn't really, but what I was probably doing was what I see a lot of beginner writers doing, is they kind of stop the story to have a description rather than weaving it in. So at the time I thought, well, why do they want me to kick out this description? This is good description. We need this. But now, in hindsight, I probably was just kind of stopping the story and having like a paragraph or two description, then going back to the dialogue. I probably just wasn't, it was probably just too much telling and not showing, but at the time I didn't realize that. So most of it I was okay with, but there was one part that, like, I had a friend, because I wrote a lot of this book in study hall in high school. Like, I would handwrite it, and then I'd had a friend, and she would I'd pass her the pages, and she was always waiting for the pages, and that kind of kept me going, just to have an audience right there that she was interested in it. And then I'd go home and I'd type it on my electric typewriter, because I was like really before computers. I think the next thing was word processors. So this was a while ago, and one thing both my friend and I didn't like was that I had a line, "Go to hell." It's a young adult novel, and the two brothers were having a fight. It's about two brothers who don't get along, and they have to play, work together on the same high school hockey team, and they were having a fight, and their father had to come in and break it up, and one of them yells to the other, like, "Go to hell," and the editor, I guess, didn't want that in a young adult book at that time. Nowadays that's probably nothing, but back then she didn't want that, so she replace it with "Fat Chance." And my friend Joanne and I, she's like, "Fat Chance, what?" And I kind of argued for it, but they wanted to keep "Fat Chance," and we're like, who says "Fat Chance"? So years later, when I brought it back and republished it, I took out the "Fat Chance" and put in "Go to hell." So that was my one thing I didn't like. So.
Okay. And so your last question I have, if you could go anywhere with any author, whether they're dead or alive, which author would you go with, and where would you go, and why?
Well, that's a tough one, but my favorite author growing up was S.E. Hinton, who wrote The Outsiders, and she actually published that when she was a teenager. I think she was 16 when she published it, so she was always like my inspiration. So I think I'd be interested to, I don't know about where we'd go, but it's cold here where I am, so I'd like to go to Hawaii or something. We'll just go to the beach and just, I'd love to know her inspiration for The Outsiders, and her process and what it was like. I think she published it in the 60s, and her name was actually, I believe, Susie, but she used S.E. because she was writing about boys, and I think they thought at that time that boys wouldn't want to read a book written by a female, so I just like to talk to her about that whole, what it was like back then, being a teenage author, and, I'd like to compare what her process was, to mine. Like, when she got published, what was did she have to do a lot of rewriting and editing, and, what was that like? How close was her original to what was ultimately published?
Right. Don't go anywhere. We will be back right after this message.
So how did you get interested in writing? How long have you been writing?
So I have like a weird story. I started writing, I'll say, at the age of 6 or 7, not necessarily handwriting. Like I would improvise and make up songs on the spot a lot. I would, when I was about, I'll say 11, 12 years old, my parents bought me a, what do you call it? Karaoke machine.
Mm-hmm.
So I would have these blank cassette tapes and I would record myself creating talk shows and then creating commercials for the talk shows. Sometimes I would create soap operas. I would just write these stories and pretend to be acting in them. And so that was the beginning of my writing. I also kept a diary, and it wasn't just always, this is what's going on in my life. Sometimes it was a song, sometimes it was poetry. And so I was always writing, but I was never interested in becoming a writer.
Mm-hmm.
I just did it for the fun of it. And I never put 2 and 2 together to say, oh, I should be writing because, this is what I like doing. And I think the main reason why that is because when I was in English class, I had a hard time passing English. And I think what happened is when I was in 8, well, for me, I felt like every year they changed the rules on me because they would say, this is how you write a paper. This is what you do, what you don't do. And I thought I was doing what they told me to do. And I would always, like, if I was in 7th grade and they said, do this, when I got to 8th grade, I would do what they told me. And then they say, no, that's wrong. You're supposed to do it this way. And then I got to my freshman year in high school, I would do what they told me in 8th grade and they say, no, this is wrong. You're supposed and I'm like, well, I don't get this. Then this is frustrating me. I'm angry. So in my mind, I said, well, then I'm not going to be a writer because I can't figure it out, whatever. So my first actual book, though, that I published was in 2007, and I self-published it. And that was only because I had took this lady from my church invited a self-published author to do a seminar, how to self-publish a book. And that was when, because prior to that, I had thought about being a writer, but my mind was, there's no way any publishing company is going to pick me up as horrible as I write. And so I said, oh, this might be the way I can do this. And what I realized then was that I had to teach myself how to write because it seemed like, even when I went to college, I was getting C's in English class. I think the highest grade I got in English class was a B. And that was really like trying hard. So I had to teach myself how to write. I had to reteach, structure, et cetera, et cetera. And in 2007 was my first book. And it was basically, it's a 4-chapter book about my 4 years in high school. But it's really not about me. It's about everyone else. All of the, we had a bomb threat. We had a substitute teacher was caught in a hotel with one of the students. And so stuff like that. It wasn't until 2007, I graduated in 2000, that I looked back on my high school years and I went, we went through a lot of stuff that we should not have, and the thing was, we didn't talk about it in school. Like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. It was just, we talked about it like if something happens, that, like, oh, bomb threats, that happens every single day. And even though it doesn't, I guess we were too young to really process it to say, this is not right, So that's when I said, wow, I think I should write a book because a lot of crazy things happened. And so that was my first initial into writing. But even then, I didn't consider myself a writer and I didn't necessarily accept myself as a writer. And it wasn't until 2018 when I finally said, oh, I'm a writer. Like that was the year that I accepted I was a writer. So that's my journey into writing.
Was that book did you do it like as fiction or like a memoir type?
Completely fiction. I changed some names. No, I changed everyone's name actually. I changed gender on one of them. And I didn't mention where I grew up because I felt like I'm telling other people's story kind of without the permission. And during that time, social media there was social media, but it wasn't big enough to where I can contact people and say, hey, I'm writing a book about you. Are you okay with that? So I just decided just to change names and things like that. So now if they read the book, I'm sure they know I'm talking about them. but
Right.
no one else does. So,
Right.
yeah.
And I know you said you've written like songs and poetry, that's like a part of my writing brain that doesn't work. Like I've never been able to write like that. So how hard is it to like switch gears to like from writing that to like writing fiction? Like does one come easier to you than the other, or?
Fiction books definitely come easier. It really, there's times where what annoys me is I'll get a really good song that rhymes really well or a poem when I'm in the bed or when I'm somewhere where I have nothing to write it down. And then it's like trying to find a way to get it because I know once I do get somewhere, I'm going to forget everything.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why that's process is annoying. And then when I do sit down and start writing it, sometimes it doesn't come back to me the way I originally had it, or I don't like it anymore. And so now I'm stuck like, ugh, but I can't just like throw it away and say, whatever, I'll forget it. I have to just sit there. And so writing poetry and songs are a little bit more tougher for me than fiction because once I get an idea, I basically can figure it out in my head first, and then I can just sit down and type it out and have fun because I know it's completely fiction. It never happened. So if anyone says this is so unrealistic, I can say, yeah, I know that's why it's fiction.
Right.
I know.
Like what have you published anything like lately, or are you working on anything now, or?
I've published, my latest book is a nonfiction book called 4 Keys to Success, that the inspiration I had noticed, well, I already knew that everyone's fingerprints and feet prints are unique. But through Instagram, I found out that our ear prints are unique as well. And our lip prints are unique as well. Our tongue has their own prints.
Wow.
And we have our own, when you pass away, they can figure out who you are with your dental records. And I also found out everyone has unique irises. And so I began to realize, I think the reason why we have such a hard time being successful is because we're so afraid to be our unique selves. Even though we have points in our lives that tell us we're unique, we're afraid to be different. And so I taught this class in church. And what I did was I told everyone to take out a paper and pen and draw your hand. And it doesn't have to be perfect. And then draw the lines you see. And then once that was done, I told them to pass around the paper and look at someone else's hand. And I said, now, obviously you all have different prints, correct? They're like, yeah. And I said, is there anything wrong with your prints because they're different? And I was like, no. Is there anything wrong with their prints because they're different? And they said, no. And I said, this is why we have so much hatred and criticism, because we're trying to be like everyone else instead of realizing we're not supposed to be like everyone else. We're supposed to be as unique as our fingerprints. And at the end of the class, someone said, this is amazing. You should put it in a book. And I said, well, I don't think I can because I made the class as a demonstration as far as drawing your hand and blah, blah, blah. But I thought about it. And then I began to think, how can I actually put this in book form? And so that's what 4 Keys to Success is. It talks about, if you want to be successful, the first step is you have to be okay with yourself being unique enough to not think there's something wrong with you for being different, but in the same breath, not thinking there's something wrong with someone else because they're different. And that is my latest book that's out. I am working on another book. I just finished a children's book series called American History. It's 9 books. I realized that school doesn't teach us enough about American history, to diversity. And so I made 9 books, each highlighting a different culture. So we have African-American, Latin, Asian, European, Native Indian, Pacific Islanders. There's 9 books in total. I just completed that, that was a tiring process. When I did the first book, The African American, I didn't have any money to pay someone to illustrate it. So I knew I had to illustrate it. So it took me a long time to illustrate it. And then I put the book together myself, and then I realized maybe I should do you know, like Hispanic and Asian. And it took me a long time to come to terms because I knew I would have to go through that process again of research,
Hmm.
illustrating, and then
Right.
making sure I word it so children understand what this person did. And I'm gonna be honest, I didn't enjoy the process. I know many people talk about, oh, the process. No, I didn't enjoy the process at all. The only thing I can say I enjoyed was the education for myself because most of the stuff, I'll say 98% of it, I had no clue about these inventors, didn't know they existed. And so I would say I enjoyed learning, but the
Right.
actual work process I did not enjoy. So I'm glad it's over and I'm glad I finished the series. Um, and then I'm like working on in my head on a book, a fairy tale, a fantasy book, but I don't know if I'm actually going to write it yet because it's already it's already difficult. Like, because usually I can write a book in my head quickly and then write it,
Hmm.
but this book is kind of difficult, so I don't know if I'm going to really do it. But yeah, that's what I've been doing.
Oh, that's neat. I like the idea of that children's series also. Because I wrote a children's picture book, and it was I've said before that was actually really hard. One of the hardest books I've written because I don't think it came as naturally to me. You know, I get like, you know, I'm glad I did it. It's my book, The Flag Keeper, and it's about history, kind of also like the U.S. flag code. But I think it's hard to write for that age group, you know,
Yeah.
because you're trying to boil it down, all this information to this short number of pages to keep their attention. Then you also have to put it in their words, their vocabulary and reading level. So it is definitely a challenge.
Well, that was the point of why I didn't like it because I found a lot of inventors, but when I read what they did, I didn't even understand it. So I was like,
Yeah.
well, then if
You
I
have
just
to.
put what I see, they're gonna like me. What did this person do? So I had to leave out a lot of the mentors because I had no clue what they really did. And if I
Right.
couldn't understand it myself, then I left them out, unfortunately. So I spent a lot of time saying, okay, now I got to find someone else. And it was just frustrating. I just was frustrating. I don't want to do it again.
Did you illustrate the other books, or did you
Yeah,
work with it?
I did. I had to.
Yeah. Had you done much like drawing in the past, or?
I used to draw all the time. Um, but apparently, when they say if you don't use it, you lose it, I can say I kind of lost it. So I had to like trace and um, I had to find ways to get around my
Mhm.
non-professionalism. But the thing is, now I still don't think it looks good that great. But I let my mom see it and I sent it to my sister and her children. And they were like, the illustrations are wonderful. And I was like, well, hey, that's what you think. And
I
I'll
think
take
we're
it.
our own worst critic. I think so.
I'll take it. But I don't think it's all that great. But for me, it's more about the information than the pictures. So.
Right. And have you done much promotion and marketing for your books? Like, what do you do for that?
You know, it's really, that's the one thing I learned during my publishing process is the marketing is probably, I mean, editing, well, I would say editing is the second most important part of the publishing process. The first part is marketing. And in the beginning, I just thought I would let everyone know, you know, through social media, I wrote a book and everyone I know is going to buy it. And that did not happen in any way, shape, or form. So that was like, okay, so now I got to sell this book to people I don't know. But how do I find these people without having to spend $2, $3, $4, $5,000? And I think times have changed. I think because of social media, because I'm assuming way back in the day, the publishing company did all your marketing for you.
Mhm.
Where now I actually went looking for a publicist and a marketing team. And I was like, you know, blah, 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 blah. I'm trying to find what are your prices. And they were like, well, before we begin, we just would like to know, what are you already doing and what do you plan on doing after you hire us? And I'm thinking, I wasn't going to do anything after I hired you.
I'm paying you to do that. You tell
That's
me.
why I'm hiring you. And I realized, well, if I'm going to pay you thousands of dollars and you still want me to market, I'm not going to pay you thousands of dollars because I could just do it myself. And so I would say this has been the hardest part. Marketing is trying to find out, what can I do? And one of the main things I do now is I drop ship my books through eBay. So I don't make any money, but for me right now, it's not about making money. It's about finding readers.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll put my book up on eBay, and when someone buys it, I just go to either Barnes and Noble or Amazon and send it to them directly. But then I write a letter saying, thank you for your purchase, blah, 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 blah. Your book will be sent directly from, and I'll tell them where. So they're aware, that it's Barnes and Noble or Amazon. So they're not looking for an eBay package. Then I say, if you like this book and you want more, check out my website. And so that's what I've been doing. And it's the most I could do right now, especially now that I am on unemployment. I had 3 jobs working in the theater, and obviously that's no more at the moment. And being that, I think, if I'm not mistaken, America is now on their 3rd wave. I have no clue when or if I'm going back. So it's like I have to use what resources I have to do what I'm doing. So that's what I'm mostly doing, is drop shipping through eBay.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. I found the Amazon ads. My kids' books do pretty well with Amazon ads. That's because I think a lot of parents are buying books for their kids, and especially like at this time of year and around holidays and things like that. So, but yeah, if you set your budget and everything and just keep an eye on it, you can make sure it doesn't
Go up. Yeah.
Go up. Yeah, but I find it doesn't. For the most part, it's easy to keep the cost. If you just keep an eye on it, then, if you find you're not selling enough books, you can just stop the ad anytime. But those have been my most successful, I think, marketing for my kids' books is the Amazon ads. Yeah.
Cool. I'll definitely check that out. I know I get emails from them once a month, I think, Amazon ads. And I've always said, oh, I got to think about that. But I really need to think about that now.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And like, what's your favorite genre to write in, do you think? Of, like, all the projects you've done?
I'd say fiction, because I've always been, since a child, had such an imagination. I've always liked making up things. Like I said, I used to be an actor. I've always enjoyed acting in roles that weren't like me, pretending. I used to watch television all the time and wish I could be in this television show and pretending. And sometimes I would walk around the house pretending I was in the television show, talking to myself, but talking to the other characters, the actors, whatever. So I'll definitely say fiction, because you get to make up whatever you want. And you don't have to, if you don't want to, you don't have to fact check, because if you decide I'm going to create this location that doesn't exist, you don't have to, and even if you do write a town that exists, you could still make stuff up. That's not true, because it's completely fiction. And, you could, so I would definitely say fiction is one of my favorite.
Yeah, me too. I've written lots of nonfiction articles, but fiction is more, it's like an escape for me too, immersing yourself in this, or creating this story world. So definitely. Yeah. Okay, so my last question would be, I think, like, what is your writing process? Like, do you outline, or do you write every day, or just squeeze it in, like, between, like, when you were working, or?
So some books, like the first book I wrote, I didn't outline because it was nonfiction. So I just wrote from my memory. My complete fiction books, some of them I did and some of them I didn't. And some of them I actually, because I have like maybe, I don't know anymore, 15, 20 notebooks from, I think 2002 to now. And I was looking for something I wrote in there, and I was going through all of them trying to find it. And I started finding a lot of my outlines from my books that I forgot I actually made outlines for. So some I do outline, but most of my outlines are trying to come up with names, because I can be writing well, and then I introduce a character, and I'm always afraid to use names of people I know. So then it stops me completely of trying to come up with a name, and then it messes up my flow. And then when I come up with a name, I kind of get stuck, and I'm like, what was I doing? What was I thinking? So my outline is usually get all the names now, so that when I write, that doesn't stop me. Sometimes I'll write down the beginning, middle, and the end. But a lot of times I just sit down and I write whatever comes to me in that moment, in that time. So that's my process. It's certain books, I think all of my books, I set time aside. Definitely in the beginning years, I was working a 9 to 5, well, 7 to 3 to be exact. So I would come home, take a break, maybe 4 or 5 o'clock till maybe 8, 9 o'clock, I would just be writing. And I made sure I set my time aside just for that, because I didn't want to make excuses of I don't have time, you know. And the only time I would ever say I don't have time is if I was lying to myself because I was procrastinating due to writer's block, which I don't get often, but when I do get it, I just feel like it takes me, well, one book I wrote took me, how long? 12 years of writer blocks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it wasn't necessarily because it was, okay, writer's block. Then I'll say, I really need to get back to it. So I would get back to it, and I would just sit there fiddling my thumbs. So then I would take 3 years of procrastination. And then I would go back to it and sit there twiddling my thumbs. And it would just be like, I hate this story. I don't want to do it anymore. And when I finally finished it, it was because I knew the ending, but I didn't want to get there too soon, and I didn't want it to be a 2,000 page book either. So I said, well, let me just write the ending and take it from there. And that's what happened. I wrote the ending, and then the rest of it wrote itself. So I technically kind of wrote it backwards. So that was the only book that took me that many years to finally get it done. But the rest of the books I write, generally, it doesn't take me that long, only because I'm used to making up stories in my head. I've been doing it since I was a child, like I said, making up scripts and commercials and silly things like that.
Right. Did you write other things during those 12 years? Like put it aside and work on something else? Or?
Well, the thing was, I told myself, I don't care. I'm not going to write this book. I'm not going to publish it. I don't care. So I wrote other stuff in between publishing it. And every time it came to my mind, I was like, I don't care. I'm not going to do anything with it because I can't do it. And so I published, I think 4 or 5 books in between those years of writer's block. And in my mind, I wasn't going to publish a book because I felt like it's just, the idea is not going to come to me of what I need to write in this book. And like I said, I think it was 2015 when I finally said, let me just write what I know. I know what I want the ending to be. It's just in between that I'm getting stuck at.
Yeah.
And as I wrote it, the main character say something, and what he said caused me to backtrack and write the parts of the middle. And when I started writing that, something happened and it clicked, and I began writing the book backwards, if that makes sense. And I thought it was a weird process, but I was happy that the process worked because I was annoyed with this book at this point in time of my life. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's good. It takes the pressure off. Probably me took some of the pressure off to kind of get that part done, because that's always the hardest part, like, getting to the ending. So.
Essays from Dysfunctional Families, a book written by Dean K. Brent exposing his family's and friends' secrets. Literary Betrayal is his family's and friends' reactions. 2 books and 1, uniquely written by author Casey Bell. Available now. Well, that's all the time we have for you today on this episode of Writer to Writer Interviews. I want to thank our guest, Stacy Juba. And of course, as always, I'd like to thank you, the audience, for taking the time to watch. Have yourself a great day. Are you a guest looking for a host to interview you? Or are you a host looking for guests to interview? Radio Guest List is the website for you. It's a free listing of guests looking for shows to interview them, as well as a free listing of shows looking for guests. Whether you're looking for a guest to interview or shows to interview you, go to radioguestlist.com.